Ho ho! And welcome to the latest installment of the Old Gazer channel, where, as you may know, we attempt to provide some practical advice, some practical information, maybe a little bit of inspiration to those who are inexperienced beginning amateur astronomers, with the goal of helping them work their way through the learning curve associated with this hobby and put them on their way to becoming legitimate amateur astronomers. Ho ho ho! There's a reason for me being jolly and jovial and festive on this occasion, and let me just explain why. Some weeks ago, my trusty little 70 millimeter refracting telescope, it died on me after 21 years, almost 22 years actually. It just simply doesn't work anymore, and I'm afraid the cost to try to repair it would far outweigh the cost of getting something new. So I have retired that old faithful little 70 millimeter refracting telescope after over 20 years. Well, of course, that left a void. I need a telescope like that in order to give me the nice wide field views that I'm wanting to look at when I'm looking at something like the Andromeda galaxy or other things out there in the night sky that are large. When I want a wide field view, a fast telescope to gather light faster, the loss of that telescope left a void. Well, I just found out that I'm going to be getting a new small refracting telescope optical tube assembly for Christmas. Yes, yes. So I will, attempt to restrain my joviality and my glee and my enthusiasm, and try my best to get on with something that might actually be of some use to you as you try to work your way through the beginnings of this great hobby. So that might explain why I'm a little bit joyful starting this one off. Looking forward to getting that new little scope very much. And so let's dispense with all the silliness now. And as I said, try to give you some information that might actually be useful, okay? I want to talk about something in this video which is one of those things that is pretty much critical to allowing one to really enjoy amateur astronomy and to be successful at it. But it's something that sometimes presents some challenges. So what is this thing? Well, I'm talking about getting an accurate, sharp, precise focus on the objects that we're looking at through our telescope. Now, you might say, well, why is that such a big issue? Why do we need to spend time talking about that? There's focus knobs on my telescope. I just turn them till the object comes into focus, and that's that. Now I'm ready to go. Well, sometimes that's true, but there are actually a number of reasons why you might have difficulty, at least from time to time, in achieving a decent focus. And that, of course, will detract from your enjoyment of the hobby. Why is it important to have a good, sharp, precise focus? Well, of course, you want to be able to see these objects, to observe these objects, or to image them, that is, take photographs of them, with the best view, the best image that you can possibly get, which means you're going to have a view or an image that is in correct, precise focus. You want to see things as they should be seen with that good, sharp focus. It's even more critical when you're taking pictures of objects through your telescope that you get a good, sharp, precise focus. And here's why. When you take a picture, you can pull that photograph into a decent photo editing program, and you can correct the color balance, you can correct the exposure, you can correct contrast, brightness, saturation, on and on. There's a lot of things that you can correct in a photograph, in a photo editor. However, there's one thing that you cannot correct, and that is an image that is out of focus to begin with. Out of focus pictures are usually throwaway pictures, unless you're just deliberately want it to be out of focus for some artistic reason or whatever. Typically, an out of focus picture is one that you can't fix. It's not going to be pleasing to look at. It's probably going to be a throwaway picture. And that's why it's critically important to make sure that you've got that nice, sharp, precise focus right up front. And that's true also for viewing. If you just want to observe objects through an eyepiece, you also will want those to be as sharp and as precise as they can be to give you the most pleasing image to view. So, unfortunately, there are some things that sometimes make it difficult to achieve good, precise focus. And let's talk about what a few of those are. First thing that we might mention would be seeing conditions. Let's say you're looking at Jupiter, and let's say the seeing conditions are not very good. And it's very difficult to know when you're in focus if when you look through the eyepiece, that object is just vibrating and moving and shimmering and weaving all over the place due to disturbances or turbulence in the Earth's atmosphere. Very difficult to know if you're in focus or not, and it really doesn't matter anyway, probably, because those viewing conditions are not going to give you a good image anyway. But that's one instance of how bad viewing can interfere with attempts to get a good focus, and that's true with stars also. Just very difficult. If the stars are twinkling and kind of jumping around on you when you look through the eyepiece, you're going to have trouble focusing that. So that's one thing. Now, the second thing, maybe it's just me who has this issue. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what other, amateur astronomers would have to say about this, but I have more trouble focusing when I'm looking at objects at high magnification. I can think of some reasons why that might be true. First of all, when you magnify an object, you're not just magnifying the image of the object you're looking at, you're magnifying everything that is a part of the light path coming through that telescope. So if you have any, optical imperfections in your optical system, those are going to be magnified. When an object is moving across your field of view, of course, it moves more rapidly at high magnification than it does at low magnification. And it's kind of difficult to focus and try to keep up with that object all at the same time. You got to multitask a little bit, which old people like me are sometimes not really good at. But that can be an issue as well. Sometimes magnified images are not as bright, depending upon the quality of the eyepiece and what exactly it is you're trying to do. And that can make it difficult to get a good focus. So, the level of magnification, at least to me, has an impact on the quality of the focus that I'm able to get on whatever I'm looking at or imaging. There are some other things. The stability of your telescope system. It's much easier to focus if you've got a steady tripod, a mount that's firmly mounted to that tripod, and an OTA that's mounted on a mount that is adequate to hold the weight and the size of the OTA. If you've got a good, sturdy, stable, steady telescope system, then certainly you're going to have a little bit easier time trying to focus than if your telescope is wobbly, shaky, that kind of thing. So that can be a factor. The quality of your focuser can be an issue. The draw tube and the focus knobs, that can be an issue. If you've got a low quality focuser, then it might not operate smoothly. It might not remain in place once you've got it set. It might slip a little bit. Just things like that. A low quality focuser, both the draw tube and the focus knobs, can make it more difficult to focus than if you had a higher quality, more smoothly operating focuser. Sometimes some telescopes just present more of a challenge in obtaining a good, precise focus than others do, and sometimes that really doesn't have anything to do with the overall quality of the telescope. Now, let me give you a personal case in point here. This is my favorite telescope, the one that I use more than all of the others put together. It's a Celestron, a Nexstar 8SE Schmidt-Cassegrainian telescope. Really good all-purpose telescope. I really enjoy it. I think it's a good quality instrument. And matter of fact, Celestron makes a lot of good stuff. I have a lot of Celestron products, a lot of Celestron gear. I find most of it to be of high quality and very enjoyable. So what I'm about to say next is certainly no knock on Celestron. Good company, they make good stuff. But the one problem that I have with this telescope is it's very difficult to focus this telescope using the focus knob that is provided with the telescope, which is normally right down here. I don't know if you can see this very well or not, but where this contraption is where you usually find a little focus knob, and you focus the image to the telescope by simply turning the focus knob back and forth. Well, the problem is when you try to, the minute you put your hand on that focus knob and start trying to manipulate it or turn it, the object you're looking at begins to vibrate and move and dance and jump and jounce, all over within your field of view, making it almost impossible to know if you're really in focus or not. Now, I think that's because it may be because, this is just my speculation here. As you can see, this optical tube assembly is mounted on this single arm mount here. And even though I found that to be very adequate, I mean, it mounts very securely to the tripod, and it's more than adequate to support the weight of the telescope and whatever other accessories you might want to put on this OTA up here. But I think there's just something about it that when you try to focus using the focus knob, it tends to move around too much for you to be able to focus well. What you have to do is you look through there and you get as close to what you think good focus is as you can. Then you have to take your hand away, wait for all that vibration to settle down, find out that maybe it's not in focus, so you have to tweak the focus a little more, take your hand away, wait for the vibrations to settle down, tweak some more, wait for the vibrations to settle down, blah, 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 blah. I'm sure you get the point. Very, very frustrating, very, very difficult to do. It was such an issue for me that I actually invested in this motorized focuser here, which does not require me to put my hands anywhere on the telescope when I'm trying to focus. You control this thing with this hand controller here. It has 3 different speeds, coarse all the way up to very fine focus control. Works very, very well. That takes away just about all of the shake and shimmy and actually makes it possible for you to try to focus something through this telescope. So that's maybe your telescope has similar issues. Maybe there's a lot of shake and shimmy, a lot of vibration when you're trying to focus, and that can be an issue. It takes a lot of patience to do that. That's why, I think this thing about taking the time and doing those things that are necessary to get a good, accurate, precise focus is a perfect example of something that I talked about way back in the first video of this series. We talked about how being an amateur astronomer takes great patience, and it also takes a willingness to do the right things the right way. And making sure that you get good focus when you're looking at something through your telescope is a good example of that. You have to be patient. You have to do the right things the right way in order to get the best possible focus so you can get the most enjoyment out of viewing or imaging an object in the night sky. So, those are just some things that can affect focus with a telescope. I'm sure there are many more. I just wanted to give some examples there, but it is not always easy to get good focus when you're viewing or imaging objects through a telescope. So are there some things that we can do to help us better focus? Yes, there are, and that's what I want to talk about now. Now, let me make a couple of comments here before we go on. From this point forward, I'm going to be talking almost exclusively about focusing stars. It's focusing planets is largely a function of, seeing conditions. If you've got good, decent seeing conditions, you'll be able to get a good focus. Same with the moon, and the moon's pretty easy to focus in on. Once you get past the moon and the planets, though, everything else that you might want to view or image is going to have some stars in it somewhere. Whether it's a nebula, a galaxy, a star cluster, double star, whatever it is, there are going to be stars in the field of view when you are imaging or viewing those objects. And therefore, it's critically important that you make sure your stars are in focus. Few things will ruin a good image of a deep sky object more than out of focus stars. So sometimes it can be very difficult to get stars in focus. So we're going to be talking primarily about steps you can take to help you better focus stars when you look through your telescope. Second thing I want to mention here is I'm going to be talking about both viewing objects through your telescope and photographing objects through your telescope. But that's going to be limited to taking photographs with just a DSLR camera. Now, there are numerous ways to take photographs of objects in the night sky, ranging from just holding your cell phone lens up to the eyepiece of the telescope, to using these increasingly sophisticated astronomy cameras that are specifically designed for astrophotography. I don't have any of those kind of cameras, and I have no experience in using them. The only pictures that I've ever taken through my telescope were taken with my trusty DSLR camera. So that's all I know about, and that's all I'm going to talk about here. So when I talk about focusing to get good photographs, I'm going to be talking about that in the context of using a DSLR to take those photographs. Anyway, just wanted to make those two comments. We're going to be talking primarily from this point about how to get a good focus on stars. And when we talk about photographing things, we're going to be talking about that within the context of using a DSLR camera to take those photographs. Okay, now, getting a good focus on stars. Well, the good news is that once you get one star in focus, then all the other stars should be in focus. I mean, that's just the way it works. They're all so far away that you focus on one, you focused on all of them. Now, that's the way it should work, and in fact, that's the way it does work. So the first thing you should realize is that you need to find a bright star to get focus on. It doesn't have to be a part of whatever object that you want to view or image in the night sky. Any bright star will do, and probably the brighter the better, because you can see it better, especially if you're looking on the live view screen of a DSLR camera. The brighter the star, the better you're going to be able to see it, and the easier probably it's going to be to bring that star into focus. So, first step in getting a good sharp focus on a star is to find a bright star in the sky. Then get that star within the field of view of your telescope and focus it as best you can, just manually. Use your focus knobs or whatever. Get what you consider to be the best focus of that star that you can get, and that's the way you do. You use a bright star, and once you have that in focus, then you can move your telescope around, and the other stars should be in focus as well. Now, if you're using a DSLR camera attached to your telescope to try to focus in on a star, you'll be using your live view screen, which is here on the back of most DSLRs, this screen. Don't even try to get a star in focus using this little viewfinder. That will be a worthless undertaking, trust me. You'll have to use the live view screen here. The good thing about that, one of the advantages of that, is that most all live view screens have a zoom feature. So once you get the star showing up on the live view screen here on the back of the camera, you can zoom in. Some cameras will allow you to zoom in 5 times, others as many as 10 times, possibly even more. Zoom in on that star as much as you can and focus on that zoomed image, and that will make your focus even better than if you try to focus on the unzoomed image alone. Okay, so that's a tip to use right there if you're using one of these cameras to try to take pictures. So pick a bright star, focus as well as you can on that star, and if you're using a camera, zoom in as much as you can and focus on that zoomed image instead of the original unzoomed image. And that's a good way to begin getting a good focus on stars. Now, what else can you do? Well, let me introduce you to this device. This is a Bahtanov mask. Bahtanov mask. It's named after a Russian amateur astronomer named Pavel Bahtanov, who invented this thing in, I think, 2005. So what is this? Well, this is an aid to help you get precise focus on stars. As you can see, it's got bars in here, some of them at different angles, different sizes, and so forth. And the purpose of those bars is to create a pattern of a diffraction pattern around the star that you're looking at through your telescope. one that you can use to bring that star into better focus. So let's talk for a little bit here about how this works. You put this goes, of course, here on the end of your telescope, just like that. And the one thing you have to remember should you decide to get one of these is that you'll need to get one that's the right size for the outside dimensions of the end of your telescope. Don't base it on the aperture of your telescope. You'll have to base it on the outside diameter of your telescope, whether that's the telescope tube itself or the dimensions of a dew shield, as I have here. So that Bahtanov mask goes on the end of the telescope out there like that. And once that's in place, now before you put that on there, I should have said, you will have wanted to find that bright star that you're going to focus on. You will have gotten that star in the field of view of your telescope. Now once you've done that, you will have focused that as well as you can. And then once you've done all of that, you've found the star, you've got it in the field of view, you focus it as well as you can, then you put the Bahtanov mask on the end of your telescope, and you look through the telescope, and you'll see that diffraction pattern, and you can use that to sharpen the focus. Now, I'm going to break away here and show you some slides to illustrate what you're going to see when you look through that telescope with a Bahtanov mask in place, and we're going to talk about how that works a little bit in those slides. And when we're finished, we'll come back and finish our discussion of this Bahtanov mask.
When you look through a telescope that has a Bahtanov mask attached, you will see a star that looks like this. The Bahtanov mask has created a diffraction pattern around that star. This is, more or less what you see when you look through your telescope with that mask in place. You can think of the two of the rays, or the spikes, or whatever you want to call them, in this diffraction pattern as forming the shape of an X, as in this slide here. And to just make it easier to see that, I have overlaid green lines over those two rays in the diffraction pattern. Makes an X. Now I've added another line in here, this time in red, which overlays the third spike, or the third ray, or whatever, in this diffraction pattern. This happens to be an example of a star that's out of focus. If you can see there, that red line is skewed a little bit to the right of center of the X. It does not go through the same common point of intersection as the other two rays do, and that's how you recognize a star that's out of focus, when you see something that looks like that. When you have a star that's out of focus, of course, you correct that simply by turning the focusing knob or knobs on your telescope until you will see that ray, or that spike that was red on the previous screen, start to move, and you continue to adjust that focusing knob until that spike is in the center of the X, as closely as you can get it. And one way to kind of help you do that is to get them to the point where all three spikes in this diffraction pattern intersect at a common point of intersection. So the idea here is to focus until you get that middle ray to be exactly, or as close to exactly, in the middle of the other two as you possibly can, and now you have a star that will be in focus. Here is just this is the same thing as the previous slide, but I've taken those colored bars out of there now so you can see what it actually will look like when you're looking at this through your telescope. I think you can tell from here that this is pretty well in focus. That center bar is pretty much centered in the X, and it looks like they're passing very, very close to the same point of intersection. So that's what it will look like. That's what the diffraction pattern will look like in your telescope when the star is in focus. And here finally is just a slide that compares the out of focus star with the in focus star, and you can see there the difference in the diffraction pattern here. And again, the idea is to bring that middle ray or that middle spike in the diffraction pattern as close to the center of the X as you can, and then your star will be in focus. So that's how a Bahtanov mask works.
All right. Hopefully that was a decent discussion of how to use a Bahtanov mask to improve the precision of your focus on stars. Now, you will be pleased to know that this Bahtanov mask is relatively inexpensive. They cost generally around $20 US or less. Now, you can pay more for that if you want to. I don't know why you would, but you can if you want to. Some people, I understand, use 3D printers to make these things. Maybe you can do that if you're into that, or maybe you know somebody who can, and you might be able to get one that might be a little bit cheaper still, but $20 or so for a Bahtanov mask. Now, here's my take, my final word on these Bahtanov masks. This is based on my experience. First of all, they work. They will help you get a better, more precise focus on stars. Secondly, they're relatively easy to use. Hopefully we're just going through that process there so you can see that and understand that. And finally, they're inexpensive. So what's not to like? I don't know why anybody would not want to get one of those. And so I recommend them highly, and I suggest that you do that as a means of getting better, more precise focus on stars. So use a bright star, focus as best you can, then use a Bahtanov mask to further refine or make more precise that focus, and you're ready to go. Once you get that star in good focus, then you're focused on all the other stars in the sky, and you can view whatever you would like. Unfortunately, just because you've got your stars in good, precise focus doesn't necessarily mean it's going to stay that way. There are some things that can occur during a viewing or imaging session that might bring things out of focus again. For example, temperature changes. They can cause contractions or expansions within the inner workings of your telescope, and that can affect focus a little bit. And it doesn't take a whole lot to significantly affect focus. Secondly, your focus might slip a little bit, especially if you don't have a high quality focuser and focus knobs. Sometimes everything doesn't stay set exactly where you would like it to stay. That might slip a little bit, and you could get a little bit out of focus. Movements of various kinds, maybe winds, that kind of thing. It is possible, after you've gone to all that hard work to get good focus on a star and you're ready to go, it is possible that things could get out of focus a little bit. So you will need to continue to periodically check focus during a viewing or imaging session, just to make sure that you're staying in that good, precise focus. Just check every once in a while to see if you're still in focus. Now, there are things called parfocal eyepieces. And what in the world is a parfocal eyepiece? Parfocal eyepieces are supposed to remain in focus when you change from one focal length to another within the eyepiece. Usually you'll find this from a certain manufacturer, which will manufacture a certain series of eyepieces that are exactly the same except for the focal length, and they might tell you in their advertising that those eyepieces are parfocal, which means that when you change from one of their eyepieces to the other within that series, it should remain in focus and you shouldn't have to refocus again. Some zoom eyepieces claim to be parfocal, which means that if you're looking through a zoom eyepiece, you can zoom from one focal length to another, from one magnification to another, theoretically without having to worry about going out of focus. Now, my experience has been, and the experiences of others whom I've heard and read about, is that you're kind of assuming too much if you assume that you don't have to adjust your focus, even with so-called parfocal eyepieces. They may be almost parfocal, but very few, if any of them, are exactly parfocal. And so I always check my focus when I change eyepieces in the telescope, or when I change, relative magnifications with a zoom eyepiece. I always check to make sure I'm in focus. Some people don't worry about that. They assume that they're still in focus, but you know what they say about assume. I think it's just good practice, a good idea, in keeping with the philosophy that amateur astronomers have to do the right things the right way, to always check your focus when you change eyepieces in your telescope. It's just a common sense thing to do so that you don't wind up disappointed with what might happen after you change eyepieces in your telescope. So, I think that about does it. There's probably more we could say, but just to review the high points or the critical parts of this discussion, it's very important to have a good, precise, accurate focus, whether you're observing or whether you're imaging, taking pictures through a telescope, simply because you want to see or image the very best quality image that you can get. And to me, it's worth having the patience and doing the right things the right way to make sure that your focus is as good as it can be while you're viewing and imaging through your telescope. When you're viewing objects where there's stars going to be present in the image, focus on a single bright star. And once you've got that in as good a focus as you think you can get, I suggest you use a Bahtanov mask to improve the precision of that focus. And once you get in focus, then you're ready to go. But make periodic checks to make sure that you're still in focus. And if you change eyepieces or use a zoom eyepiece, make sure that you check the focus when you change that eyepiece or when you go to a different focal length with that zoom eyepiece, just to avoid disaster and make sure that you haven't gone out of focus without really realizing it. Let's wrap this one up. Hope this has been useful to you. I hope you will forgive that little segment at the beginning when I tried to play Santa Claus a little bit. But at any rate, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. And until then, let me close, as always, by wishing you clear skies and good viewing.